Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. I am Vadim Perlovsky, and today we are joined by Dominic Venegas. He is the whiskey master. What is your title, Dominic?
It could be, they give me someone's, I say whiskey convivialist or whiskey educator.
There you go. Educator for a fantastic portfolio of whiskeys with Pernod Ricard. The one we are tasting today is Jefferson's. Jefferson's known for Jefferson's Reserve, Jefferson's Ocean. I'm excited to get nerdy and learn all about what makes what, and learn all about the process and everything we can. Today, we're joined by the members of the Los Angeles Whiskey and Spirits Guild. David Donahue is the president of said guild. David, do you want to say a couple words?
Be very happy to, Vadim. Thank you, as always, for the hard work and dedication that you put into bringing us these virtual tastings, as we are all well aware. And if there's anybody here who isn't, it's a tremendous amount of effort and work that goes into coordinating the mailing and the distribution through the train conductors, of which there is one, Jordan Bloomfeld James, who does, I understand, personal deliveries to individuals' houses and sometimes take sushi. I've still not witnessed that, but I've heard it reported. But then again, we on the north side are the luckiest because we have Jane Kilkenny, who always is entertaining us. And then also we have Amanda and Lori that during this time of year, we are treated with cookies and confections. So take that, you sushi person. Anyway, it's long-winded. Sorry, Vadim. Looking forward to Jefferson's Ocean and the other expressions that you're going to be talking about, Dominic, and I will hand it off to you.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name is Dominic Venegas. I am the whiskey specialist with Pernod Ricard USA. What does that mean? I cover the West Coast, so I have 8 states from Alaska to Hawaii all the way, which is weird, to Kansas. And I get to talk about whiskeys from Royal Salute to Chivas Brothers, which means we own Glenlivet, Aberlour, Scapa, Longmorn, Tormore, Altavania, a lot. Then I have all of Middleton. So Middleton, Jameson, Redbreast, The Spots, Method and Madness, Powers, a lot of great whiskeys out of there. And then we have our Americans. We have Jefferson, Smooth Ambler, and Rabbit Hole. I've been with the company now for 6 years. I have been in the industry for coming up on about 30 years, starting as a lowly barback here in California, worked my way up and ran a bunch of restaurants and hotels around the country until I got this position. And it's mainly because my passion is spirits. A lot of people are like, I want to be a bar owner. And I'm like, I don't want to be in debt. I want to be, I like my life, and I like to, I love the education part. And I love teaching about the spirit, and I like the romanticism and the history that goes into our spirits. With our portfolio at Pernod Ricard, it was kind of a no-brainer to join the team. My first whiskey when I joined was Glenlivet, which is still very close to my heart and still one of my number ones. But nationally, I am the Redbreast guy. So that's why Vadim and I have been trying to get something really taken care of. But for those of you that don't know, Redbreast, California is the biggest market worldwide for that. So that's why I get to spend time here, and where I am located in Oakland, California. We're going to go over Jefferson's today. Jefferson's, I've been representing Jefferson's now for 2 years since we acquired it. And we acquired it in a nice little purchase of their distillery, which is Kentucky Artisan Distillery outside of Louisville, Kentucky, probably about 20 minutes. Really, really tiny, small, probably the size of your house distillery. But the Jefferson story starts in 1997. We're about to come upon our 25th anniversary this February with our first release. Jefferson's is going to be started by a gentleman named Trey and his father Chet. And Chet, let me tell you, so Trey and Chet, Trey is the 9th generation Kentucky, I should say, in the Kentucky business, bourbon business. His great grandmother was the first woman to be arrested for bootlegging in Kentucky. So he has a lot of family history, and it's gone through that. But when he started the company in 1997, him and one of his dear friends actually both started a company that year. If you know Julian Van Winkle, or a little company called Van Winkle Bourbon, they actually do the same thing that we do. So they started purchasing bourbons from different companies. Julian Van Winkle also had his family proprietary recipe. So he had it made at Buffalo Trace, which ends up being the home for Pappy Van Winkle now. Whereas Trey, with Jefferson's, at that time when we started Jefferson's, there was 8 distilleries in Kentucky. So you had Heaven Hill, Old Forester, Maker's Mark, Woodford Reserve, Four Roses, Wild Turkey, Evan Williams, all those great ones. So he bought whiskey from all of them except for one, the one distillery that does not sell whiskey to anybody, which I really appreciate, but still helped him out with growing his brand. It's Maker's Mark. So he said, hey, listen, all this beautiful bourbon is already aging and resting in Louisville. And at the time in 1997, nobody was drinking bourbon, not as much as they are today. So at that point, he said, hey, listen, I have already pretty much this whole palette of whiskeys that are aging that I can then blend to produce my own brand. So that's what he started with Jefferson's. So he started producing bourbons mainly from Heaven Hill and Buffalo Trace that he would then take. So one of his first releases was a 15-year-old single barrel from Jefferson's.
Dominic,
did really
how long
well.
ago was that? I'm sorry.
That was 1997. So coming up on 25 years. Now,
so he was sourcing and blending a long time before. He's one of the first, I would guess.
Exactly. One of the first also to be pretty much, the way I look at Jefferson's is an innovative. They have science projects, as I like to say. He has science projects going all around the distillery. I look at the barrel, I'm like, what's this? Oh, that was on the back of a bull for a couple of weeks, and we wanted to see how it agitated the whiskey. I'm like, oh, that's fun. Yeah, and it comes along with, how did the Jefferson's Ocean start? How did this start? He's like, well, listen, all the whiskey that I bought, so just say the barrels behind me, it's already bourbon. By law, it's bourbon. It's been aged. It's new charred oak barrels. He's like, now I can do whatever the hell I want with it. So his family also has a big wine background. So he's a big California Napa cab guy, right? So he started playing with some of the wine barrels that he did, and then would release some of the finishes just for his friends. It started to get such a big thing that's when Jefferson's was kind of born. Now his dad, Chet Zeller, Chet is, I would say, is more of he's more of a scientist and a very much educated person about bourbon. He is probably the most prominent figure in Kentucky on bourbon history. All the books that he's released are all pretty much used for school and universities. They're not really ones that you look at. It's like Jefferson's made at Kentucky Artisan Distillery. It doesn't say anything like that. It'll say this distillery made this whiskey. This is how it was produced. This was the mash bill. This was the years it was produced. So he has some really great books. So Chet had all this information coming in that he helped his son pretty much come up with these releases. Do you have a question, David? Go ahead.
I do. Yes, please. Thank you. You were saying that Chet's father was
Trey's father, Chet.
So Chet
or
was,
if you want to say Chester.
So he was writing books on bourbon.
Yes, still does.
And so I am a big fan of Bourbon, The Rise and Fall, or The Rise and Fall by Fred Minnick.
Mm-hmm.
So have you listened to or read that one?
Just to give you a set, absolutely. Fred's a friend, and Chet is actually one of his mentors. Chet is going to be pretty much, he's like I like to say is more royalty than Trey is. Trey is a very nice, jovial guy. He's more of the party aspect of the bourbon industry. He's making this whiskey because he wants to have fun. His friends grew up in that industry. I mean, they know so much about bourbon, and he would tell me things. He's like, listen, all these guys are making the same things. He's like, there's one distillery that releases 6 whiskeys that all have the same mash bill, just different labels. And these idiots have no idea what they're drinking. And this was a long time ago. So my background is also, I worked in off-premise. So I ran a store in San Francisco for 10 years. So my history with Jefferson's is much more from that side, where Jefferson's was an off-premise brand. You never saw it in restaurants and bars before 2 years ago. It was only for shops. It was only for collectors. It was only for people that were very into it.
The question about Chet, and I apologize, is
no, please.
What books? What are the books? Where are they? Where can we look for them?
Oh, you know what? Let me after at the last 20 minutes, I'll go grab some books and we'll bring them out for you guys.
Okay.
And we can check them out.
Thank you.
No problem, because it's great, because I'm actually, when people never ask those questions, so it's awesome that people want to know. So let's get drinking. I'm talking too much. Might as well get tasting now. So we're going to start off with pretty much our flagship, which is Jefferson's Reserve. Jefferson's Reserve. This bottle, well, I got to put something, there we go. So Jefferson's Reserve, this was our first initial release. And if any of you remember that initial release, it was actually aged at the time. So it was Jefferson's release of 14 years. And we released a few other ones, but Jefferson's Reserve now is a blend of a 6 to 8 year old bourbon. Now I'm going to get this question a lot, and I'm going to tell you as much as I know, mainly because he does buy from these, still buys from those original 7 distilleries. Remember, he said the 8th one doesn't sell. He doesn't buy from anyone else, so he is still using a lot of Heaven Hill, but he's also using some other source whiskey and contracted whiskey. And for those of you that do taste a lot and have tasted some of these smaller contracted whiskeys, you may taste some similarities. And please, if you do, let me know what you think it is, because I love this game. So with the Jefferson's Reserve, now to let you know, yes,
if I may, just quick thing. So
absolutely.
we have 6 samples in front of us, and a lot of us at this point have 6 glasses ready to go.
Okay.
And one of the things we always ask at the beginning is, should we pre-pour? And if you can just tell us the order, or tell us what we're going to be tasting.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in this order. So we're going to go Jefferson's Reserve, and pretty much
the very
everything.
Small batch, right?
Yeah, that's the very old. The VSB would be our intro. So Jefferson's Reserve Very Old, which is one of the bottle that you got. It'll go from there. Then it'll go Jefferson's Twin Oak.
Okay.
From Jefferson's Twin Oak to Pritchard Hill, the Cabernet. After that, we have the Chef's Collaboration. And then we're going to Jefferson's Ocean, and we're going to finish off with Jefferson's Cognac.
Awesome.
Now, if you're asking why I did that, we're going to go pretty much from 45, 45.1 to 247. All right. So we're not going to get too off that. We're going to go heavier as we get into it. Now, the Pritchard Hill, that is going to be a little, it's 45.1, but it tastes a little meatier. I think it's because of that cab influence in it. But just to let you know, we are going to go slowly in that ABV and go up. So with the Jefferson's Reserve, this was his second release, I should say. The one was very small batch. That was a small release that he did, and that was 4 to 6 years. All right. So that one's pretty much our intro that you do see in shops a lot. Now, Jefferson, that one just says Jefferson's on it. Doesn't say Jefferson's Reserve. Then we have Jefferson's Reserve. Now, Jefferson's Reserve, like I said before, is our flagship, meaning that pretty much all that we are tasting after this is based off that recipe, except for the Jefferson's Cognac Rye. All right. So the Twin Oak, the Pritchard Hill, the Chef's Collaboration, and the Ocean will all have some influence from this Jefferson's Reserve. Now, Jefferson's Reserve, when we first started it out, yes, it was older whiskeys. At that time, he had much more whiskey to play with because there weren't all these brands buying these honey barrels, right? Now, people were just very excited to sell these barrels. When we first started talking about this, I was like, well, in 1997, how much were you buying barrels for? He's like, dude, nothing. No, I was buying these barrels for like $2,500, $3,000, and I could turn them around. I'm like, well, how much are they now? He's like, yeah, I can't even talk to you about that. So the fact that he had that, but also because of his father, he had some really good, and I'd say the same about Julian, is they had really good contacts with Buffalo Trace, Heaven Hill, Wild Turkey, who, when we did our initial tour of Jefferson's, we went to all those distilleries because they are pretty much the foundation of our spirit. But also Jefferson's at KAD, because I've talked about the distillery. You're like, well, what do they do at the distillery? They actually do produce whiskey. So with Jefferson's, we do produce pot still whiskey. In fact, when we first went to our distillery, I walked in the distillery and I was like, oh my God, look at that still. It's the original Old Forester still, the original 1932 Old Forester still, that if for all of you out there, and I know all of you do pretty much know, the birthday bourbon, the still is the shape of that bottle. That's what the inspiration for the birthday bourbon was the original Old Forester still. So when you walk into KAD, you see this little squat still in the shape of that birthday bourbon bottle, and it's really fantastic. And so that's their small, and when I say small, 10 of us can hold hands for the circumference around this still. So very, very small. Now, what we produce out of that is about 30% of what goes into our blends. Now, what we're doing is we're buying a lot of that column still and some pot still distillate, but most of the time it's column still, and we're putting in our pot still distillate. Now, I should say, since 1997, we've been at 2 other distilleries. The other ones, I can't even tell you what the names are because they don't exist anymore. There was Shenley's, and then when Castle Brands owned Jefferson's, they bought KAD about 5 years ago and then moved the situation, so they got it. And then when we purchased it, we pretty much took over KAD and then just remodeled it. And as of 6 months ago, we got a brand new still just down the street in Kentucky and from Vendome. So that's a smaller pot still. I mean, still the same size, just not as round. It's more height, I should say, on this pot still. It's about 5,000 gallons, which is, for me, that's tiny, but for the bourbon world, that's not that big. I mean, not that small. All right. So some of you are already drinking, which I like. If you haven't tasted the Jefferson's Reserve, I hope you did. What do I get in this? one of my big things about Jefferson's Reserve is, I think because I love pickles so much, I get dill. I get so much dill in it, which isn't a bad thing. It's that herbal quality that you get sometimes. And it comes from certain distilleries that's why I asked the question. If you are familiar with some of these flavor profiles, you may not be wrong in going like, hey, this tastes like such and such. But with the foundation of this Jefferson's, and believe me, I sit with Trey a lot and I talked to him. We were just together a few weeks ago at Whiskey Fest. And I'm always like, are you ever going to tell us the mash bills for these whiskeys that you're releasing to us? Because people ask us constantly, and I really want to know these mash bills. And he's like, I really can't tell you because it's proprietary. And I'm like, that's bullshit. Because if I go to Heaven Hill, they'll tell me everything I want to know. So I think it's mainly because of his blending style. So he's like, I'll just tell you, this one's a high rye one. And so I have my own breakdowns of what I'm like, all right, so this one's like 70-20 with 10% malted barley. He's like, you're close. Or I'll go off of, this is a Four Roses recipe where it is high rye, so I know where you're buying this from, or this is a wheated, so I know where you're getting this from. But all in all, with Jefferson's Reserve, you can taste the age. So the youngest in here at this moment is about, I would say 8 to 12 years old. We're not going to have anything older than 12 years old. We're not going to have anything younger than 8. It actually is something that I've been really talking to them about, because here in the United States, we don't really press upon age statements as much as we do in Ireland and Scotland. And it's something that really bothers me, because people will look at bottles and they're like, oh, that Redbreast has no age statement on it. I'm like, so you're not going to drink it? You'll drink Woodford Reserve. You'll drink Maker's Mark. You have no idea how old that shit is, but you drink it, right? And I'm like, so it's only for the European whiskeys that you think that much about? I'm like, I've tasted some delicious 2 and 3 year old whiskeys, but if you've tasted a lot, you can taste that and you know that it's young whiskey, right? Now with this, you can taste that it has some age behind it. Some of the older Jeffersons, you can actually taste a lot of that age. Now, as we get into some of these other ones, I really want to touch upon the point that I said before. These are all kind of, like I said, they're science projects. All right. So this next one that we're going into, the Twin Oak. Better if I stand up and you guys get, there we go. Jefferson's Reserve Twin Oak. Now, the one thing I want you to see is when you see that label, right under Twin Oak, it says custom barrel. All right. Now, custom barrel, what are you talking about? Because in bourbon, we have laws that say, hey, it has to be charred oak, it has to be American, or, brand new barrels. What we do is we work with Independent Stave Company. Independent Stave, ISC, is one of the biggest cooperages in the world. They have coopers in Scotland. Here in the United States, we have a couple. They actually just built one in Japan. They're one of 2 cooperages that we deal with. The other one would be Kelvin Cooperage, which is also based. They have one in Speyside, and they have one in Louisville. And with Kelvin Cooperage, what I love about them is that they char and toast all their barrels over a natural flame, meaning that they're using broken down barrels to start the fire, and that's what they toast and char their barrels with. They're not using any gas, which some cooperages use. All right, now Independent Stave Company. Independent Stave Company is probably the biggest cooperage in the world. Some of their clients are some of your favorite whiskeys, but what they do is they also like to mess around and do these projects because, especially in the bourbon world, people are looking to be innovative, right? And it's hard when we have these certain laws that say we can only make it in a certain style, in a certain way. So this proprietary Twin Oak barrel that they made is, if you can understand, I wish I had, imagine I have a stave in my hand, and so a charred stave. What they do on this stave is they put grooves in the stave. So just think about it having, if you just took like kind of a claw and just stuck on the stave and went down, and it would just have these little ridges. Now they're going to be in kind of a wave. They call it the wave barrel. So those ridges are in a wave. Now, why did they do that? Now, the thought process behind it is that's going to give more wood area for that bourbon to touch, right? So it's going to also have those grooves for that bourbon to settle in, and that's going to be toasted and charred as well, right? So what does that do? Well, it just adds a little more, I would say, what I say is a double barreled. So it's going to give a little more of that. I mean, if you know Jameson's Black Barrel, it's going to give a little more body, a little more full flavor. This one's coming in at 45%, 45.1 again. But the thing is, okay, so I told you with Jefferson's Reserve, we had 8 to 12. With Jefferson's Twin Oak, the youngest in there is actually 10 years old. The oldest is 12, all right? We take that 10-year-old, or 12, 10 to 12, and then we finish it for 4 months in that barrel. Now, one thing that I know a lot of people may not know, and if you do know, that's great, because you've had some great people talk to you. But when I started working with Jefferson's, we went to Kelvin Cooperage. We spent a whole day at the cooperage working with the coopers, toasting and charring barrels, and it was the most magnificent thing I've ever done. Especially when you're going in there and you watch them toast that barrel, and they take it off the flame and they're like, stick your nose in there, and you stick your nose in there and it just smells like toasted marshmallows. It's the most, it's amazing. It smells wonderful. You get that vanilla, those marshmallows, and they'll stop and they're like, all right, so most companies, and they're like, and the one that talks about the most is probably Woodford Reserve. Woodford Reserve talks about a proprietary toast that they do the barrel before they char. He's like, listen, every bourbon company, he's like, some of the big ones don't, they just straight char. He's like, but anyone that wants flavor in their whiskey, they toast and then they char. And I'm like, well, isn't the char going to cover the toast? What's the point of toasting before you char? And they're like, when you toast, that sets the flavor. The char sets the color. So the nicer it's toasted, and that depends on the toast. So I watched it toast for 25 seconds. That's how high that flame was and how much it did. That 25 seconds, and it chars a lot longer than that. But you set that in, and then that char, whether it's a char 3 or char 4, sets that color in. So if you want char 3, it's going to be, which is what you get from most distilleries. And then char 4, you're going to get that alligator skin, as they call it. But this is what that Twin Oak project went. So what do you get out of it? Yes.
Dominic, you were talking about the independent stave and how they char and then do the wave pattern and the clawing down. And you're talking about, going there and watching the process happen. Is it because you guys are sourcing your own barrels to finish your sourced product in, or is it the distillate that you guys are making that you're starting to age in these barrels? And I apologize, I might have missed that if you said.
No, 100%. And this is a great question, because it is something that I didn't bring up. But when Trey buys the barrels, he'll assess the barrel and say, okay, I'm actually going to move this over into one of my barrels, which he does most of the time. There are barrels that he will set as kind of honey barrels that he thinks that are perfect by themselves. But most of the time he does, especially now with our company, owning so many different whiskeys. Now we're using Jefferson's or Smooth Ambler or Rabbit Hole bourbon cask now to send to Scotland or whatever. And so Scotland and Ireland are like, they have total control over everything. So they're like, listen, this is what we want. This is the barrels that we're going to use the most. So now they're conforming kind of that. So with Jefferson's thought process is like, hey, listen, he is the Wild West. So he's like, listen, I could put this on the back of a bull. We can do the Twin Oak project with staves. He's just trying new things all the time. So when we went down there, we met with who they call at ISC, at Independent Stave Company, their main cooper. He's like a chef cooper is what they call him. He's the cooper of flavor. So he came and sat with us because all of us were like, I'm trying to dissect this Twin Oak. What it doesn't really, I'm trying to make sense with this. And he's like, well, just think about it as you're using this barrel and we're putting it in another barrel. He's like, we're just trying to make it faster by putting those grooves in there so we don't have to move from barrel to barrel, which was easier for me to understand. So I'm like, you're going to get more flavor. He's like, yeah, you're getting more flavor. He's like, but it does have to age, right? So we're talking about Kentucky, right? So if we're talking about Scotland loses about 2 to 3% to Angel share per year, whereas Kentucky 3 times more of that, so 8 to 9% per year. So that's a lot, right? So it's a lot of money that they think about that they're losing. So he's like, listen, we ain't got time to move it from barrel to barrel. So if we can figure out a way to make that go without shifting the barrels, this is the way that we can do it. Now,
so
go ahead, please.
I'm sorry again for interrupting. I'm a basic question. Jefferson said they source product.
They contract as well. So sourcing means that they'll go to a distillery, they'll taste some different barrels, right, and they'll buy it, right? Or they'll go to an independent distillery, Bardstown Distillery, and they'll say, hey, listen, this is the mash bill that we have. This is what we want. Exactly. Right now, that would be more in line with Rabbit. Rabbit Hole's very much in contracting before they started the distillery. With Jefferson's, they're doing both. They're contracting and sourcing.
So how does the barrel component fit with Jefferson's? Because I know you have a big portfolio, but with Jefferson's and all of these barrels, how do they fit? Because this is an empty, brand new barrel.
These are actually all the barrels behind me in that.
So they're empty. They have no distillate in them.
No, that's not true. The Twin Oak ones, yeah, they're virgin, absolutely, before they're toasted and charred. Exactly. They were brand new barrels. They had never held anything before that.
Okay.
And that's what's going to happen with all of our barrels before. So they didn't help unless he's buying those barrels that he's sourced, then he'll use them. And that's for some of the other blends that we do have. So if he's using like for the Chateau Pichon, the Sauterne, he's going to use some of that sourced because that's going to be more bolder whiskeys, I would imagine, to hold up against that Sauterne.
So Trey and Chet are how many brands are they working
Just
with?
Jefferson's. So they work with 7 distilleries. So the 8th would be Maker's Mark, which they don't work with. So those are the distilleries. And it's like I said, it's contract. So they still have these contracts because he jokes. He's like, listen, a lot of us used to buy from Buffalo Trace. He's like, not anymore. So they don't let anybody buy from them. He's like, so only a few of us that started with them are still with them. He's like, but I don't buy just from Buffalo Trace. He's like, I'm like, LDI is something that I very much taste in his whiskey, and he's like, yeah, you may be onto something, which I get pissed off about. I'm like, listen, we're no knuckleheads. I'm trying to ask you questions so I can help tell people what the truth is. But he's like, but also I'm blending. He's like, so it's hard for me to like break it down. And I'm like, no, I understand that, because that's his whole thing. He's like, it comes to the art of the blend when it comes to these barrels. So each batch that we do for any of these bottlings is about 10 to 15 barrels. So it is a small batch. I mean, and I would say that is exactly the same thing for Smooth Ambler and Rabbit Hole. They're not going more than 15 barrels per batch. Now, hold on real quick. I know that I sent you guys a hat. Did you guys get your hats? Your Jefferson's Ocean hat? Good. I'm glad you guys got them. Merry Christmas. If you didn't, Vadim owed you something. Just kidding. So how do we like the Twin Oak? What did we think about the Twin Oak? Nice. I like it.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry, I like the Twin Oak. But
sure, Jordan, please go ahead.
I see everything's about 90, and with you guys switching from barrel to barrel, do you always proof down at the end, or do you ever proof down in between barrels to sort of let it age at a lower ABV, or how does that work?
It's always at the end.
Okay,
that's a great question. It's always at the end, because I asked that same question too, because we have a Jefferson's Ocean cast strength. So that's where that came off of. I'm like, well, when do you cut it? When do you add the water to it? That's what I always like to tell people that don't understand whiskey when I come in. I'm like, well, this is our product with water added. We've added water to this. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, I'll explain to it how it can be easier. But for those of you that don't understand cast strength, this is why it punches you in the face. It's very strong. All right. Now, the next one we're going to go into, if we don't have any other questions, is the Jefferson's Pritchard Hill. Now, this one is one that I am really excited to have in this tasting, to be honest with you, because it's not an easy bottle to find. And for those of you that are wine fans, I hope you guys do know Chapelet and Pritchard Hill. That was one of the things when I started, because I come from a fine dining background. So when I saw like Chateau Pichon, and then I saw Pritchard Hill, and I saw Groff, I was like, what the hell are you doing? Are you just a nerd into wine? What's going on here? And that's exactly what it is. So he was like, listen, I'm a big fan of Groff, and I went and I was just geeking out with them, and they were like, hey, we'll give you some barrels. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then I was the same thing. I'm like, how did you get Pritchard Hill barrels? Because those things aren't cheap. I mean, there's a waiting list to get this Cabernet, first of all. So people, Jefferson's Reserve, this is one of our many finishes that we do. This is going to be a Cabernet cask finish from Pritchard Hill here in Napa Valley. Pritchard Hill is a very, very...
Dom, you're flying through these. I actually had a quick question about the Twin Oak.
Sure,
I noticed that was the only one of the lineup that had a sticker on it specifically saying non-chill filtered. So does that mean all the other ones are, or what's the deal? And it's interesting that it's non-chill filtered at 45.1, because usually 46 is the sweet spot.
Exactly. And I love that you said that, because for me, and I think for a lot of us, 46%, 45% is a sweet spot for really getting a great flavored whiskey. I actually, working on the European whiskeys, I always get upset because I'm like, why do you release things at 80 proof? It's not even fun. It's just like, and I mean, yes, I get the flavor, but even with Glenlivet, when we came into the United States, we released a 48%. We didn't come in at 40%. So it was a whole different beast. So with me, most of the Irish whiskeys that we have always come in at 46. So when he came in at 45.1, I was like, yeah, that's beautiful. Because as Americans drinking bourbons and ryes, we usually drink around 45, 50%. So it has that strength behind it. Why did he put that non-chill filtered on there? I have no idea, because I know the Ocean's on non-chill filtered, the Cognac is non-chill filtered. I'm not sure about the Pritchard Hill 100%, but I can check on that. But it is something that I did ask. He's like, when we came out with the Twin Oak, it's just something that we put on there. And I was like, but why? Why did you put that? I'm like, you could have put that in the notes. It just looked kind of weird. But there's no rhyme or reason why he did that. Because I'm like, why didn't you put it on the other barrels or on the other releases? Because if it's non-chill filtered, we should all know that. Or if that's just your style, right? Because I think that would be even better. But with it being cut to down, I'm actually surprised that it's non-chill filtered as well. So I know with like Glenlivet, which is at 80 proof, Glenlivet 12, we do chill filter a portion of it, but not all of it. So nowadays you can control that now because you have all the pipes of doing it instead of doing it the old school way. So that's another thing I can ask and figure it out though.
And my other question was the ABV is kind of all over the place, right? Like,
yes,
how did he get to 45.1 where
40,
some
exactly.
are 45 and some are 47? And
well, that's what I said. I'm like, so how is it not just 45? I mean, like it's 45.1.1. I have no idea of why it's 45.1 and not just 45. And it's pretty consistent pretty much with all of them. There's only a couple that are at 45. And then we have the cask strengths as well. And then the Jefferson's Cognac, which is at 47. So there is kind of no rhyme or reason. His whole thing is like, he is probably, of all the brand owners that I own, he's crazy. He's in a great way. Like he's just like, we make these. He's like, since they've started 25 years ago, they have about 30 some odd releases. A lot of them that didn't go into the general market. A lot of them were just made for Kentucky. And a lot of them actually didn't make it out because he's like, oh, we tried aging it or finishing it in a Tokai barrel. It didn't work out the way that we wanted it. Or we finished it in a rum cask and it didn't work out the way we wanted it until they got Gosling. So they have a few other ones that they tried as well. And that's, and that happens with a lot of distilleries. They'll go and say, oh, I think we'll be delicious in the Armagnac barrel, and they realize that it doesn't work out sometimes. Now with the Pritchard Hill is a very small production. This is going to be Limousin oak from the French forest of Limousin. So it does have that French oak influence. Now what is that going to do? It's going to add a little more creaminess to it. But also what I love about this is you get like those strawberries, those raspberries, you get the Cabernet. The Cabernet does come through and it's nice and it's not too dry. Now, when I say that, as we taste the Cognac, you'll get what I mean about not too dry, but it still has a nice finish. It's still warming, some spice. It's lovely. And this is one, I had a bar in New York come to me and say, hey, we're making old fashions with this. I'm like, whoa. That's amazing. And that's a $25 old fashioned, but you don't need to get crazy like that. But it was good because this was a high-end place. So they had made a vermouth that had some Pritchard Hill Cabernet in it. And so they were making a Manhattan variation as well. And that was the thing, but I was like, I would never do that. This is something you just have by itself. It's so wonderful. Why would you want to make a drink out of it when it's just drinking so lovely? How do we like it? Now, to let you know, this is the Jefferson's Reserve, so 6 to 8 years, and then we finish that for 12 to 15 months. Now, when we do 12 to 15 months, that means we're going to have 20 or so, 15 to 20 or so casks, like I said, that are going to be with 12 to 18 years or 12 to 18 months finished, and then we blend those together to come up with our release. So it's not going to always be, it's always within the blender's kit, I guess I should say, because my whole thing with the Pritchard Hill is how do you keep that consistent every release, because it is a batch release. And I think actually it doesn't say it on this one. The chef's collaboration gives you the batch number. But this is a special bottling. In fact, I'm surprised that it is still being made and it will be made for the next couple of years.
And you said that, oh, wow, my question just flew right out of my head.
What happens when you drink good whiskey?
No, it's delicious. Yeah, very easy to drink. All of these tend to be on the sweeter side.
Yeah, I would say that. I would say, from what I understand, yeah, this is going to be a little more. We're right now. We're a little more corn heavy. As we get into the Ocean and the chef's collaboration, I should say, would be starting with the spice, gotcha. More rye.
Oh, what I was going to ask was, you said that this is Jefferson's Reserve, so this has 6 to 8 year old.
This is going to be
So, but then it's finished for another 12 months. So
4 months for the Pritchard Hill for 4 months.
Pritchard Hill is 4
No,
months.
I'm sorry. I'm getting mixed up. I was thinking of the Twin Oak. 12 to 15 months.
12 to 15 months. So when it goes to bottling, it's actually 7 to 9.
Yes.
Yeah. So it starts off of a 6. Let's say 6.
Exactly. 6,
Another year.
I would say more 8. So you're going to be even more towards like 9 to 10.
Okay.
Because he does, like I said, it depends on what he's releasing. So he will use the older bourbons for those richer finishes. So of course, with the Cabernet, with the Cognac, it's going to be a lot. I mean, I would even say, it's hard for me to do this because he doesn't give us the exact time, but I would say 8 to 12 years for that.
Okay. And then, so when in these finishing casks, like the Twin Oak being finished for 4 months, I mean, having that cask made just for this is not a cheap endeavor.
Well, so that was the question that I asked. I'm like, are you just using these casks one time, or are you sending them back to the cooperage to have them toasted again, or what's going on? So he's like, we use them again. He's like, we're using them for other projects. He's like, because yeah, you're right, they've been used, but remember, he's like, it's already a bourbon when we put it in, so there's no law saying I can't use this barrel again and not call it a bourbon. I'm like, you're right. So they do some other stuff with it, but also he's like, we do recycle the woods. He's like, so we'll send it back to the cooperage and ISC will either use it, or they'll send us back another one, or they'll just send us back the same one that's been re-toasted. So it depends, because I'm always like, this is always only for, like you said, for 4 months, right? So I'm like, this is just giving a toast. I mean, like a kiss of toast, right? Or even that slight char. So it's all also, which I was thinking is, if you look at Jefferson's reserve to that Twin Oak, you will see the darker color. You will see that it does get that richness and that color into it.
Definitely. Yeah. I can imagine that the 4-month age on a virgin, freshly charred, toasted barrel would be drastically different than that of like a reuse, maybe once or second time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But these are very mellow, very easy to drink, very sweet. I could see this as being like a great introductory bourbon for people to really.
Well, that's exactly what I always tell people. Especially with our range, we have Jefferson's, who's kind of like, it's already bourbon, I'll do whatever the fuck I want with it. Then you have Smooth Ambler, who's like, listen, we don't have any bullshit. I'll tell you everything we're buying. We have West Virginia, we have Indiana, we have Kentucky, and we have Tennessee that we're using. Now they just released their 100% West Virginia because they've been around long enough now that they have that. And then you have Rabbit Hole, Rabbit Hole's like, we are the future. We make new whiskeys like no one else. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Heard this story many times and whatever. But it's actually what I like about our portfolio is they're all brand new distilleries in Kentucky or I should say 2 are in Kentucky, 1 in West Virginia, but new to the game. Even though Jefferson's been around for 25 years, it's still being found out because it's only been off premise. So if you hang out in the shops or you're at Bevmo or wherever it may be, you've seen Jefferson's. But if you just go to the bars and the restaurants, you don't really know Jefferson's too much. And people are always, this is a big question, especially from the last year. Jefferson's, why did you name it Jefferson's? And I was like, well, I didn't name it Jefferson's, but the owners named it Jefferson's because it's actually made in Jefferson County. So that's a big part of it. Another part is that Thomas Jefferson helped alleviate the War of 1794, which was the Whiskey Rebellion, and working with George Washington to make sure that we weren't taxed as Americans to make whiskey. So that's a big part of it. People are like, well, also he made, I'm like, yeah, he did make whiskey, but all people during that time that produced grain distilled their grain into distillate because they didn't want their grain to rot and go away. So they needed something to use it for. And it was what makes everybody happy. Whiskey. All right. So Jefferson is a big part of that. Now, some of you may know the brand from a while ago, but Jefferson used to be on the bottle, but he is no longer on the bottle, just his name. And it's more of the story of Jefferson. And actually, because they do produce rye whiskey now at Monticello, as well as at Washington Space, which I'm curious to taste. And I'm really curious that they never reached out to Trey about it, but it's still part of that whiskey history. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is because of Trey's family and the history with Jefferson's being in Kentucky and being a part of that community, they came up with Trey and Chef Ed Lee. So Ed Lee is one of the Michelin star chefs out of Louisville. He owns 2 places. One is 610 Magnolia and Whiskey Bar, and the other one is Milkwood. both in Louisville, known for making crazy fried chicken, ribs, a lot of barbecue, beautiful food. Now, him and Trey are drinking buddies, which is what it comes down to. And him and Trey got drunk one night and said, you know what? Chef Ed telling Trey, there needs to be a bourbon that's very food friendly. And he was like, well, why don't you collaborate with me? You know, it's a drunken story of two guys that actually are very great at what they do, and they collaborated on it, right? Now, what Trey wanted was he wanted something that would be paired with dishes that would come from Thomas Jefferson's age. So we're thinking more of like a lot of venison, rabbits, just a lot of gamey meat. Mainly, he wanted to go towards pork, chicken, and meats. So they came up with a few different iterations. They actually had about 6 different collaborations before they figured out which one they had. Not sushi yet, but you know what? I was actually talking about this on a side note. Louisville has some of the best sushi in the United States because it's a UPS hub. So they get fresh Hawaiian fish. I was so surprised. I was like, oh my God, this is some of the best sushi I've ever had because of this. So there should be a bourbon that's friendly for sushis, but I don't know if I actually want that, to be honest. But going back, so they collaborated, they made some stuff. So this is a blend. Now the blend in the age of this, again, 6 to 8 years, we're using 6 to 8 year old bourbons and 6 to 8 year old ryes. Now, if you follow Jefferson's or have seen Jefferson's, we have not released a rye whiskey 100% until we just did this last year. But before that, it was 2012 and it was just a one-off, right? Now he sources rye. He does not make rye. That's the one thing that I did ask. I'm like, are you making rye? He's like, nah, not right now. He's like, it's not really cost effective for him to make it at the moment, mainly because he's buying all his corn and everything from a little town called Waldeck, which is about a mile outside of his distillery. So he wants to keep all the grain pretty much within 5 miles of the distillery. So that was a big problem for him. But he said 6 to 8 year old rye with 6 to 8 year old bourbon. Now the portions on what is it 50%, 60 to 40? I have no idea. I cannot tell you that. That is the one thing that I'm not too sure about.
I thought you said everything that we tried so far was sourced, but he's making his own as well. Is that part of these blends?
Yeah. So what I said earlier was we do make pot still at the distillery.
Oh, okay.
So we do produce that pot still that we
and then what do you age it in?
We age it in the ISC or the Kelvin barrels.
Okay. So just regular bourbon barrels, none of these like
it's regular bourbon. No, this is just regular. No, absolutely not. No, he doesn't do that until he does the blend. So that was
I'm surprised he hasn't tried that to like age one for 2 years and see what happens and use it in like small batches.
You know, that is something that I remember one of our other ambassadors asked that question. And the thing is he has so many ideas in his head that like every time I'm like, wow, you should have told me about this release. I didn't know that. Are you going to do another? Like, why'd you do this? Why are you going to do that? He has a crazy mind. So like his whole thing with Ocean Aged at Sea is like, we have some other ones coming up with O-Search, which is our original release. Now O-Search was the Jefferson's first release when he did this about 15 years ago. O-Search is a boat that goes around the world tagging great white sharks, tiger sharks, killer whales. It pretty much deals with apex predators of the ocean. And his buddy runs the ship. They grew up together, and he invited him out for his 40th birthday. And Trey pretty much said, hey, listen, would it be okay if I brought some barrels with me? And he was like, sure, yeah, go ahead, bring a couple of barrels. He bring those 3 barrels, and it kind of took off something that he never realized how this beast has grown now we're on 25th voyage. But with the chef's collaboration coming before that, when he released that, like the same thing, because I had no idea who Ed Lee was when I first started with Jefferson's. I was like, I don't know. I mean, like, how's the rest of the country supposed to know who this guy is in Louisville, right? I'm like, you know. But as I looked him up, I'm like, oh, this guy's crazy on Food Channel. so he's a pretty bigger guy. He's much bigger than I thought he was. But also meeting him on one of our visits, he's actually a really cool guy. He's very, very much a foodie. I mean, his whole thought process, you know, he's like, you can have some really fatty foods with this. And that's when we were talking about, and I'm like, well, why would fatty foods? He's like, well, he's like, bourbons have a certain fatty quality. He's like, and they hold up with fatty foods. He's like, and it's just a natural, he's like, and it's not just bourbon. He's like, but whiskeys in general. He's like, they just have a much more compatibility with food. And I've been challenging in that every single time. And I just went last week and I had a ramen, which was full of fat, right? And I had it with the little Jefferson's Reserve because I didn't want to get any crazy good stuff with it. But it was really nice and really beautiful and really coated my mouth. Like I just got more flavor than I ever thought, because I think it was because of the fat in my mouth. And he's like, that's what helped brings that flavor out. So he actually opened my mind to being like, oh, this is actually a really cool project that you guys worked on. I thought this is just you guys being, you know, circle jerking each other off and be like, hey, let's collaborate on doing this. But no, it worked out really well. Now this is where you get a lot of that dill. So where is he getting that rye from? But also that spice does come through now. Not as sweet as the last ones we tasted. Still coming in at 45%. You do get more spice on this one. And the bottle says limited edition, even though it's still been in production for the last, you know, some odd 10 years.
I take it you don't watch Top Chef, since Ed Lee was on it like 2 or 3 times.
I don't. Maybe I should. Did he win? I guess not.
No, he did well. And then later, the most recent season, which was done in a bubble in Oregon during COVID, he was they had like alumni come and be judges, and he was one of them.
Oh, okay. That's actually my next question. Was he a judge? Which would make sense.
I'm contestant.
All right, so just a few things here in my notes. We do source mostly column still. In-house is the pot still. We have 4 stills at the place right now. So that new Vendome still, that old Forester still, and then we have 2 little, well, I shouldn't say, they're 2 column stills, but they're not small. And they actually don't use them. So they just sit there. If you ever go to Kentucky Artisan Distillery, it is actually like going to a Wild West frontier town. If you can imagine, it's like they still have the horse ties in the front of it and everything. And then you go in and it's almost like a general store. And then you walk into the distillery and you're like, oh, wow, this is crazy. But it's a very, very small, it's almost like a winery. So you see these things and you're like, wow, do you guys use that? Or is it just sitting there? They have this whole little setup of the ocean thing. So they have a mini O-Search boat on there that's pretty big, and it has the barrels of where they're kept on the boat. So it's really cool to see. But this is a very, very, very small production. I mean, in 2020, so just 2 years ago, we did 1,000 9-liter cases per year. I mean, that's nothing compared to like, I mean, that's for ocean, but that's nothing compared to like if we're talking with Jim Beam or even Pappy or any of those things. We have 3 warehouses at the distillery that we keep. We do sell barrels. We do sell half barrels. If you do buy a barrel from us, we will send you the barrel wrapped up in the bottles, which is pretty cool. I've seen them do that. So what they do is they just take the boxes and wrap it around the barrel, and then they wrap that in plastic and ship it out all as one piece to wherever you're at, and you get that for you and your group. We do have fermenters at the distillery. The fermenters are made out of cypress, if you guys are curious about that stuff, which I know some people are. We do have, as you can see behind me, a palletized warehouse, or as behind Vadim as well. All right, do we have any other questions before we jump into which I think is kind of one of the stars of the show? Now, before we get into the ocean, can I ask which voyage you have?
A very good question. Let me pull up the photo. I already gave all my bottles to our guy. Voyage 23.
That's the one that I have. Perfect.
All right.
Now, I will tell you that because Jefferson's 23, the last voyage before COVID. Voyage 24, which will probably be released. Is there a special stuck outside of Long Beach? Well, I was just going to elaborate on that because the number 24 was stuck in the Panama Canal for the entirety of 1 year. So there may be a Panama Canal ocean coming out because it was on a boat the whole time. It just never went anywhere. So that'll be 24, which should be coming out, but we just released 25. 25 will be a wheated bourbon. So every so often in our ocean releases, we release a wheated bourbon, and we also release a cask strength bourbon. The one that you have right now, the 23, is going to be a bourbon. Now, Voyage 23, I don't know if any of you have gone online, have checked anything out on Jefferson's, but if you do go to the Jefferson's website, we actually do have a log of every single voyage that we've done. It'll tell you where it started, where it's finished, what happened on that voyage. So it's really cool. Now with Voyage 23, as you can read up on it, very smooth sailing, which is very unique for a lot of the voyages, right? First off, I want to talk about this little thing, because when I first heard about Jefferson's Ocean, I was still bartending, and I was like, wow, this is so cool that they could do this, and you know, and why? And then me at that point, big Scotch person and loving my Islay whiskeys, and knowing that like those Islay whiskeys are getting that sea salt, also that peat and everything, but it gets a lot of that briny and sea salt from being on that small island, being windswept and everything. And we don't get that in bourbons, because listen, the bourbons are just sitting in warehouses like they are behind me. Kentucky is inland, there's no water around it, so we can't get any of those flavored profiles, right? So when Trey went on that initial voyage on his 40th birthday, this is kind of the thought process that came behind it, saying, hey, listen, there's these other spirits like Linney Aquavit, Kelt VSOP Cognac, that have been doing this for over 100 years, where they put barrels on boats. And, you know, for Kelt, they sail from France to Australia and all the way back. And then they release those, and they're delicious. And you have that salinity to it. You have these really nice characters that you don't get in cognacs, or even in the Aquavit. It's a really cool thing. Now, when I saw that with Jefferson's, I was like, well, how much is it going to impart? Now, I think the first voyage I tasted was like voyage 6 or 7, and it was salty. It was super salty. It was like a salted caramel. I was like, oh my God, this is delicious. This is wonderful. And that, after I started working with the company and talked to Trey about it, he's like, that's exactly what we wanted. And that was exactly my thought process. He's like, how do we get these characteristics that Scotland's been going off of from their various islands in their area and their regions? How do we impart this in our American bourbons? He's like, you know, Kentucky's the home of bourbon, even though you can make it anywhere in the United States. But how do I make it unique here? So that was the thought process behind that, right? Now, when he did that initial voyage, he took a few barrels on there. 2 of them were destroyed. 1 of them lasted. The one that lasted, now this was a 9-month tour. He had a cooperage fly and meet him at a port to repair the barrel. Now, when he finished that voyage, or when the barrel finished that voyage, he got probably about 6 bottles of spirit out of it, looking like maple syrup. It was thick, dark. We tasted it when we were at the distillery. It still had little, and it was salty and sweet, and it was just concentrated so much. And he's like, listen, I didn't realize constant movement, that agitation was just shaking those barrels up. He's like, and it made this beautiful thing. He's like, so after we realized that, he's like, now we do a tour of 3 to 6 months, and we have them taken off at different ports if they start to break up. He's like, but most of the time they make it the whole tour. Now with the whole tour, you're going, I mean, you have quite the you have 5 different continents. You're hitting about 25 different stops. You cross the equator 4 times. We start in Savannah, Georgia. That's where the barrels load up on the ship. We go down from Savannah through the Panama Canal. Panama Canal will go around Australia. So we'll hit up all the ports which is about 4 different ports in Australia. We head up through to Taiwan, into Japan, go from Japan over to Alaska, down the West Coast through California, down through South America, back through the Panama Canal, and into Savannah. Now that's the trip that this Voyage 23 went on. Now, if you read that voyage log, it'll be like smooth sailing. We didn't hit too much rough water. Whereas you read some of the other ones, it's like we hit some storms, we had hurricanes, we had typhoons. This one was pretty much, it's really funny to read, because they're like, we just cruised around Tahiti into Australia. So it's really cool to see and how much they do it. So now, how many barrels do we put on each boat? All right, so that's one that I like to talk about. For the Jeffersons that you have right now, that was 400 barrels. 400 barrels go on that. That's a lot. That's a lot. Considering each batch that we make, so that's a lot of batches. And then for the weeded and the cast strength, 200 barrels. All right, so it's a smaller batch for that. Again, I said a blend of 6 to 8 years old. You do get that salinity, right? You get, this is, someone said, he's like, it's like a Werther's, salted Werther's. And I was like, yes, exactly. Now, if you do taste these, now some of them, especially if you get to the cast strength ones, and as we know, cast strength just gives you the truth. It tells you the truth about all your whiskeys, what you can get, how you can cut it, what you can make open up from what you're adding water-wise or ice-wise, right? Now with this, it is calmed down at 45, but it still has a lot of body and a lot of depth to it. I mean, it's just wonderful. Butterscotch, a little salinity, and it's a long finish. This actually makes a delicious old fashioned, if you're into that. But I had a salted caramel old fashioned that someone made a syrup with, and it was fantastic. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want you to do. That's you tasting what you see and kind of just pushing it a little more, right? But Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea, this is something that has been pretty much, I would say, is a cult favorite in our portfolio. This is the one that probably gets more esteem anywhere I go. And as we heard earlier before, it is going to be, especially here in the Bay Area, any bar that's near the water or on the water or close to any kind of body of water has Jefferson's Ocean. If you're in Marina del Rey, if you're anywhere in Santa Barbara, you will see Jefferson's Ocean. And it makes a lot of sense. It's just something that people don't realize, especially because in a world of bourbon that's very monotonous and everything's kind of made the same way, aged the same way, this is a really cool thing. And I should say that about the whole Jefferson's portfolio. And that's what Trey wanted to do. He's like, listen, all these people making the same mash bill, releasing it, and you assholes are paying this much money. So I appreciate that. Let me see. Yeah, that syrup it's a good one. You can actually buy a salted syrup from Tirani, which you can buy at any store. But if you're doing that, that is really sweet. So you just want to add like a 1/4 ounce to maybe a 1/2 ounce of that. If you really like it sweet, then add 1 ounce. But with that stuff, you can also make your own at home. But I would say if you go to the store, it's easy to buy. You can actually get it in a squeeze bottle. And it is and actually someone was talking to me about a salted caramel hot toddy with it. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds wonderful. But this is the fun thing about being with this brand, and I go to different bars and they're like, have you tried this? And I was like, wow, I never thought about that. That's fantastic. But this is what we want, right? So how do we like the Ocean Aged at Sea? And I know that some of you probably have had this before. What do you have any voyages that you like, or what do you like about this or not like about this? We do have, like I said, the 25. We will have a Jefferson's Ocean Rye coming out as well. So we do have some special ones coming out, because I know that with that year being shut down, every year we usually have 2 to 3 voyages, all right, during a regular year. Last year obviously wasn't a regular year. This year we had 2 voyages, which will be 25 and 26. And I think we have a voyage going on right now. So we'll see some other ones coming out this next year, probably more so than you have in the last couple of years. All right. So, hey, listen, you guys, I don't want to.
But question about the voyages. Are you like putting them on a ship that does something else, or are you?
Yeah. So great question, because the original voyage was with OSearch, right? OSearch is you can go on osearch.com and check it out. And they actually have a tracking device where they track different great white sharks. We actually sponsor a great white shark. His name is Jefferson. You can see where Jefferson goes. Jefferson's actually, he's a Boston guy, so he loves Massachusetts. So he's always around that area. But it's funny to see them, what they're tracking and doing. But OSearch does very limited trips for us, obviously, because they're doing some real good business. So we do have special releases for that, but we also do with container ships that we do put barrels on. And when we do container ships, we don't put them in containers. We put them pretty much on I don't know what the term is for boats, but it's like the second level in the front. So I guess that's the hull of the boat, in the front part of the boat. So Trey, or one of the people that works for Kentucky Artisan Distilleries, usually meets some of the port or at some of the ports to taste the distillate and see how it's going, or to see if the barrels need to be released or repaired, which I am like, that's an expensive product. I mean, or prospect. What if you're in Melbourne and something happens to the barrel? You have to a guy fly to Australia to fix a barrel? That's not cheap. Like, how? And he's like, well, it doesn't happen like that all the time. He's like, it's a very thing. He's like, and we have them watching. You know, the funny joke was, I was like, so you lost 2 barrels on your first trip? Like, what happened? He's like, well, to be honest, I think they drank 1 barrel.
Do you guys accept applications for interns to go to Australia and sample? I mean,
exactly. I mean, like, seriously, that's what I was
I have
like.
A resume.
How do we be these, you know, I'm like, are these merchant Marines just going around? Now they're aging bourbon. They had no idea. This is amazing. So it's a crazy thing. And that's why, like, I mean, with this Ocean series, like I talked about earlier about he putting it on the back of a bull, which I was like, that's amazing. But he put what they're called a blood not a blood cask. It's a blood. It's a term for a barrel that's about this big. Now he put barrels like that big on the back of a bull, not like a quarter cask, which is a bigger barrel. But still, he wanted to see what happened. And, you know, I was like, he's like, that's just for distillery people to come taste to see what we did. He's like, but I'm just trying to think of other things. I'm like, are you going to put one on an airplane? You taking one to SpaceX? Are they going to take one to freaking space? Like, I mean, you know,
brands have done that.
Know. Yeah, I'm sure. And it's fun, but I love that he has all this fun with it now. Now, the fun that he's having now, I think, is mainly that he's been bought by a big company like us. So now he has all these sister distilleries that he can use. So he can use some Scotch barrels, or you can use some Irish whiskey barrels, or you can use barrels from Altos Tequila or Del Maguey Mezcal or Martell Cognac, which we're getting into right now. So the Jefferson's Cognac.
Before we do that, I want to put a quick thing. I know you're on a roll. I know you've got a flow.
No, please. We got plenty of time. So,
but before we get to our last pour, and I know how these people are thirsty and they'll go through it. I want to take a second to have everyone jump on camera. And say thank you to you for finding the time to spend the evening with us, for making this possible. We really appreciate it. I know this has been a long time coming.
This has been a long time coming. So my partner, she does the same thing for Aberlour Scotch, and she's worked with that even before. And so she knows how much I've been stressing about this. I'm like, I got to get this fucking tasting done. We keep running out of products. We can't get any stock of anything. It's pissing me off. I want to get them stuff. And even I go to LA for work, and I'm talking to my LA guys, and I'm like, we need to get product. And they're like, we're sold. It's on the boat. And I'm like, fuck, I've been trying to do. How long have we been trying to do this? We've been trying to do this.
I mean, since September last year when we did the
it's been a long time. So this isn't going to be the last time you see me. I want to do this again with Redbreast and some of the other whiskeys, but this makes me so happy to be here tonight and be with you guys. So, and especially because, you know, California makes me happy. So that's great. We're all on the West Coast. I hope most of us are anyway, but thank you very much for having me be a part of this. And I love this group. I've sat in on some tastings that you guys did. Was the Hawaiian rum? What one was that? Kohana. That's one of my favorite distilleries, and they're very kind people. It's a beautiful thing, and I love that tasting. But yes, I mean, you know, I can, with all the brands that I represent, I try not to do too much PowerPoint, because obviously a lot of us look at too much PowerPoint. And also, I think you want to hear my stories and see that instead of looking at a map, because I think most of you know where Kentucky is now and all that stuff. So, but we can always get nerdy about it, and I can always do this again, and we can bring in more stuff. In fact, I tried to get Trey here tonight, but he had another obligation. It's the holidays. Everyone's busy with doing buyouts at the distillery for parties. So he's doing his thing. But for the next one, hopefully we can get maybe someone from Middleton or someone to come out here and say hello. But thank you very much. It's been an awesome pleasure. And I'm glad we did this. I'm glad I got you guys the hats. And I look forward to doing this in person. That's much more my style. You know, we had Whiskey Fest here in San Francisco last week. Sure.
Everybody raise a glass so we can get the picture taken care of.
Cheers, everyone. Got it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vadim. Thank you.
Yeah, and the one thing that I think is, like, Los Angeles needs a Whiskey Fest. I don't know why they don't get it. But I'm like, God, they have so much love in Los Angeles that they need a Whiskey Fest. It only goes to these 3 cities, which are great. But at the same time, I'm like, there's some cities that do deserve this as well. Okay, so I shouldn't say last but not least, but to me, this is the one bottle of Jefferson's that I pretty much carry with me everywhere when I'm going into a new account or a new shop, or anyone that hasn't tasted Jefferson's. I'm like, this is the one that is like, ooh, I love it. It was when we first tasted it, I was like, oh, I'm a big cognac fan. And if you know Martell Cordon Bleu, it is probably one of the best spirits made in the world. It is gorgeous. It's delicious. Martell is a very old house, the oldest house in cognac, very small production out of the Bordeaux region. We're the only distillery or only cognac distillery that uses Trancé oak. So Trancé coming from the Trancé forest. Trancé is going to be known as a tighter grain than Limousin French oak would be. So it's going to be a little more wood character to it, but also it keeps that flavor really rich. So you're going to get a lot of that cognac still coming through. When I first tasted this, I was like, oh my God, this is so sippable. This is lovely. At 47%, this is, I mean, out of all the ones that we tasted tonight, this is the highest ABV, and it drinks so easy. Also, because it's cognac cask and it's rye, that spice plays so well with that cognac. It is wonderful. So when I first got this, the first thing I did, because I'm a bar nerd, is I made a Sazerac, because Sazerac's made with rye, and it's, you know, and also the original Sazerac's made with cognac. So I'm like, this is perfect. It's gorgeous. It's delicious. It's wonderful. Yeah. Dill that layers. It's wonderful though. It is a really bold, beautiful, full bodied. Again, it's going to be the basis of that Jefferson's Reserve. So we're going to take that for 9 to 19 months, right? So we're going to use barrels that are 9 months that finished to barrels that had 19 months. And then we're going to marry those together to get what we want as this release.
So I labeled this as a rye in a cognac cask. Was I wrong? I thought this was a...
not at all.
So this is not bourbon. This is a rye.
No, it's a rye whiskey.
Okay.
Did I say bourbon? I may have
No. You said it's Jefferson Reserve. So I was like, wait.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so Jefferson's Reserve in age. So Jefferson's Reserve age style, 6 to 8 years old. That's what I meant. I'm sorry.
And this is the only rye in the portfolio, right?
Currently, yes. Currently, there will be a rye ocean release. You know, the thing is, you know, we talked about this, and he's like, well, remember, rye wasn't a big deal in 1997. No one gave a shit about rye whiskey. And I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because one of my big stories is 10 years ago from now, we were out of rye whiskey here in the United States. The only people that were producing rye whiskey was Jim Beam with Old Overholt and the Jim Beam brands, and Michter's. They were the only ones that still had stock. Wild Turkey had a little stock, but they were all running just slim because they didn't have the stock. Now, you go to the store, you see about 15 different, for some reason, they all have green labels, but so many different rye whiskeys. Now, this is just because people are drinking more whiskey. All right, same thing happened here in Scotland. If you pay attention to your scotches, whether you like Macallan, Glenmorangie, whatever it may be, you notice that they started releasing a lot of non-age statements because we ran out of scotch. People started drinking too much scotch. So for an example, we ran out of Glenlivet 12 in certain countries. The United States is the #1 market for that. So we had to take it out of certain countries to make sure that the US did not run out. Now we're fine and we're back to normal because we all caught up. But at the same time, that's what happens when a lot of the spirits, they run out of, they don't forecast enough. And the same one good example is the Japanese whiskey people. They had no idea that Japanese was going to sell so fast and so much. So now it's hard for us to get a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old without paying $300 for those bottles because they didn't forecast that people would be drinking this much. And that's not their fault. They just didn't see that. I think it was like 2010. Everyone loves Japanese whiskey, Suntory time. So, and it's thing now that they're catching up with, but it's still going to take time. And I always say, I'm like, I don't think I'll ever be able to afford an 18-year-old Japanese whiskey ever again. Because unless it comes back into a big, huge production, but like the way that people are buying it, it's crazy. About with this, now my thing was like, listen, we're getting these casks from Martell. These aren't cheap casks. You're getting them because you're in the company. If you didn't, you'd have to pay so much money for this. So are you going to be keeping these casks to do an older release? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, that's the idea. And he's like, we're going to do an older age statement that we will release with cognac casks. And I'm like, that's wonderful. That's what I want to see. Because if you do go back and you check out some of the older bottlings of Jefferson's, you will see we had a lot of age statements at one point. 15, 14, 21. And that was, I think, just like I said, before everyone started buying bourbons. So, all right. So I'm glad that you guys love this. This is if you like Sazeracs, if you like sidecars without the sugar rims, delicious to mix in. Even an old fashioned or a Manhattan riff, but by itself, it is wonderful. Sorry if you hear the screaming child.
You hear nothing. Oh,
That's
wow.
good.
That's very good. Very balanced. Just a little bit of spice. Delicious.
Yeah, as you notice, this is probably the most empty bottle I have.
Dominic, can you talk about the availability of the expressions that we've gone through? I would imagine.
Yeah, so the ones that we did taste are very much available right now. Cognac is you can find that everywhere right now. Bevmo, Total Wines, your local shops in Los Angeles. Yeah, very much so. And I would say the Ocean, you're going to see probably the last of the 23, and you'll see 25 coming in. Like I said, look out for 24. That'll be the special release one. The Chef's Collaboration and Pritchard Hill, those can be hard, and the Twin Oak, they can be harder to find just because all shops don't order them. But if you have like Remedy Liquor, OC Bottle Shop, Mission Liquor, they'll have them. You know, and if they don't, they can get them back in stock because they've had them before.
I imagine K&L has.
Yeah, K&L always. I always forget about K&L being in LA. Yes, absolutely. And K&L especially, and Mission Liquors, they work with us a lot because we do actually barrel selections. So they will do barrel selections from us as well. So you may want to look out for those because we do Jefferson's Ocean single barrels. And that's something that we can, talk about for anyone that does it, but you can look out. But I know that Total Wines, with all their shops, they have their own Jefferson's Ocean bottles that they do, and they're going to be batch numbered and everything on them.
How does that work?
So it'll be certain selections. It's usually the cask strength ones. So it's ones that they work with and they order ahead of time.
Okay, that's good information to know because there are a few of us here. Mr. Jefferson's, who is a huge fan of cask strength. So what I'm hearing you say,
definitely.
Dominic, is that Total Wines,
because I go to.
Strength. Gotcha.
They'll have some cask strengths, but they'll also have their single barrels. Now, not all of them are cask strength, but most of them are. It just depends on the shop and what they buy. So I would say for like here in Bay Area, we have a lot of single barrels, or I should say cask strengths. And we have a few that have been released at 45%. We also have, you tasted 6 of our releases, but we also have the Chateau Pichon. We also have Jefferson's Reserve Single Barrel, which we just released at the beginning of last year. So that's another one that we have, and that's Jefferson's Reserve Single Barrel, and it comes at 100 proof. And that's non-chill filtered as well. I don't know why he chose to release it at 100 proof and not cask strength. That is something that we actually kind of yelled at him about, but he also said, listen, my bourbon is not to be, he's like, I blend bourbon and release it. He's like, I'm not making this bourbon. He's like, so when I release it to be drank. I don't release it to be cut. He's like, this is what I think you should drink the bourbon at. This is how you should enjoy it. He's like,
so that's 100 proof. What is his cask strength? Is that
the cask strength, it'll go from about 112 to 118.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's his whole thought process, but he understands because of the single barrel project that we do. Most of the accounts that I deal with on the West Coast are like, we want barrel strength, we want barrel strength, we want cask strength. All right, absolutely. So I go back to them. I'm like, listen, this is what people want, and so now they are buying cask strength that they will be releasing. So you'll see more of that coming into our portfolio because I think they see the market going that way, and that's the whole thing, right? Like I said, this was an off-premise brand, meaning for the shops. Now he's seeing restaurants, bars, cruise lines, everyone coming up to him, and they're like, well, no, this is what we want. This is. So he's more open to it now, and especially now that he has the strength of our company behind them to help them out getting that stuff. But it's better for the future, I think. But I also love the honesty about like, hey, listen, I'm releasing for you to enjoy it as it is, not for you to like cut it with water or bring it down. He's like, it's already bourbon when I buy it. Now, what am I going to do to manipulate it? He's like, what I'm manipulating is what I think that you would enjoy it at. And I was like, I understand that. That's 100% honesty.
Dominic,
And I love it because a lot of companies won't say that.
I'll share with you something to talk about. You're kind of hitting my center lane because I'm a huge advocate of how I like to drink my whiskeys and my bourbons, which is on a very large format ice cube. I haven't said that a couple of VTs. And so what that does, if it's solid, doesn't have a lot of porosity, it's going to melt very slow. One is going to chill it, then it's going to slowly dilute it. So it takes, the higher proofs, at the, let's say 110s, and then slowly kind of changes it. So after, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, however long it takes, I'm kind of going through that proofing down. And it just, sometimes if it's a really great one, it's just an exceptional experience.
And you're 100% right. So when I do these tastings, I'm in a restaurant or a bar, like I'm like, hey, listen, most of you guys at this point have ice programs, right? So when you're using those 1x1 cold draft or 2x2 custom cubes, the reason that we use those is because, yes, when you add that to a cask strength whiskey, say, that whiskey is going to change probably about 20 different times as you're drinking that whiskey because of that depth of that water being added to it slowly, right? If I put chip ice in it or just regular ice, it melts immediately. Plus it's adding in flavors that it has from your freezer or wherever you're getting it from. It's not distilled water. It's not pure, right? But also when you're thinking about the whiskey, you got to think about that you are adding a chill aspect to that whiskey. So if you think about you, say right now it's cold outside, it is cold outside. If you went outside in a tank top, the first thing that you would do is do this. You would constrict. It's the first thing the whiskey does when it hits ice. It constricts. It doesn't open up immediately. So it needs to slowly adapt. With that ice that you're talking about, that distilled water, it'll slowly open up because that water melts because it's pure. There's no air in that ice. So it slowly melts and it's going to adapt. So like my favorite thing to do is one of my brands is Aberlour. So Aberlour Abuna, which is cask strength. It's my favorite to make an old fashioned with or to order an old fashioned with. And when I do it, people are like, holy shit. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But by the end of that cube, or even the middle of that cube, it opens up. It's taken on so much flavor. The first couple drinks, yeah, you're like, oh, a little strong. But by the time it's getting to that middle of that ice and it opens up, it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And it's bringing it down to a proof that is palatable to what you want, right? And that's what it comes down to. I mean, that's what I always tell people. I'm like, listen, cask strength is great. It's awesome. It's wonderful. But most of these companies, all of my companies, are releasing it to be drank right then. It's not for them. But nowadays, we're all much more educated on our spirits. So it's not just tequila, whiskey, but also tequila, cognacs, mezcals. People want that cask strength and they want to be able to bring it down to what they think. And it's one of my, with Glenlivet, we have the Glenlivet Madura. So natural aged, cask strength, straight, non-chill filtered. And the whole thought process behind that was, we want you to know what it was like to buy whiskey in the 19th century. When you came to our distillery, we just filled the bottle up. You went home and you cut that bottle to bring it down to what you thought would last you for a few weeks, a month, a couple months. You may like it at cask strength. And that's the wonderful thing too, especially all of us here, we have these palates that have been drinking whiskey. So now I know that 20-year-old me would never be able to drink what I drink now because my palate just wasn't developed. It wasn't open to that flavor and to those nuances. And now it's like, that's what I always tell people. I'm like, when I do my red breast training, I'm like, everyone's drank Jameson. What's Jameson taste like? You get crickets because we take shots of Jameson. It's a light whiskey that just kind of vanishes away. Right. And I'm like, then we have red breast. Full-bodied, rich, you have a finish, you have character. I'm like, Jameson is drinking whiskey, Redbreast is thinking whiskey. This is whiskey for us to get deep with, to enjoy, and to understand, which is now coming back into norm. I mean, Redbreast and that style of whiskey ruled the world for over 100 years. It disappeared because column distillation was developed, and being Irish, we're like, that's terrible, like Diet Coke kind of whiskey. Why would you want that? So they kind of lost that war. Now they're coming back stronger because their whiskeys are now bigger and bolder. But it's also this style of that we're learning, right? People are learning that these cast or these bonded whiskeys, even that's my favorite style of bourbons or ryes to drink, are bonded. Like I think that 100 proof is that sweet spot for all of our whiskeys. We go a little more than that, it's just too much, but that 100 proof is gorgeous. I think you get everything out of that. So I don't know. Yeah, I think, you know, with Jefferson's and what Trey's thought process is, I love it. I mean, he's like, this is what I want to release it at. I think it's perfect to drink now. You don't need to cut it. You don't need to do anything. So just enjoy it as it is.
You guys make a batched bottled Manhattan too, right?
Yeah, we did. So that's and it's still being sold. So that was a collaboration with Esquire magazine. So Esquire magazine had come, and that was before I was with the team. So Esquire magazine had come to Jefferson's and said, hey, listen, and that's the collaborations that Jefferson's does. They do, like, not just Ed Lee or the Esquire. They have a few other things that they come up with and work privately with some companies to come up with their own things. But the Esquire thing was like, yeah, they kind of wanted if you're familiar with like a black Manhattan, so a black Manhattan would be like a bourbon Manhattan with a base, or I should say a vermouth of an Amaro. So like a Verna, which would be, or even Fernet, something that's gonna add a little more spice and depth. But that's what they wanted. So it's delicious, it's great, and it's just meant to be served on the rocks, or you can stir it up and pour it into a glass. So it's ready to go. And that'll be made with Jefferson's Reserve.
So Dominic, one of our signature moves here is we do a poll at the end of the tasting to see what people thought was their favorite. And everyone has voted, or almost everyone. And I'll let you guess what you think this group's favorite was of the night.
Cognac.
Without hesitation. I will say that the results surprised me a little bit. I was expecting more votes for Ocean, but yeah, we got 40% for Cognac Cask Rye, 30% for Pritchard Hill.
I'm actually kind of in the same boat as all of you guys. This is kind of the way that I would go. I would actually probably, well, it depends on the Ocean Voyage, I guess, but yeah, over the Twin Oak. But I love this because Pritchard Hill definitely is a strong second. Now, like I said, it's one that we don't get, but the Groff Cabernet, if you find that, buy that bottle. I can't find it anywhere, but it is rich. It's gorgeous. If you like that Pritchard Hill, it's going to be even richer. See more blackberry. Oh, there you go. See the color on that? You see the color, how that's a nice deep dark. That's some good juice, and that's that Cabernet coming through on that. And then we also have Chateau Pichon Sauterne. And that one it's the Grand Selection Chateau Pichon Baron. That is just honey in a glass. It's a Sauterne cask, the second biggest Sauterne producer in France, and it is wonderful. Chateau Pichon, and that would be what we call our Jefferson's Grand Selection, which we haven't released a Grand Selection in a few years, not since I've been with it. There you go, the 1991 Presidential Select Straight Bourbon. That's yeah, those are the special ones. They haven't released any of those lately, so, or else I'd have a sample. That's the one that I was like, why don't we make the Sauterne anymore? Come on, let's make the Sauterne. It's always the Sauterne.
You guys had a wood experimental series for a while.
Yeah, and those are going to come in like 100 ml, 200 ml bottles. Yeah, they do sell in those packages. Yeah. So that's kind of where the Twin Oak project started. So in that little package, you'll see Twin Oak, you'll see Toasted Barrel, Char number 3, Char number 4. They just do different things: light toast, medium toast, and that's most of the stuff. You can buy those bottles at some bottle shops, so like Mission Liquor, San Francisco Whiskey Shop. It's more, I mean, you could actually, if you went to Total Wine and they didn't have them, if you ask them about them, they could probably have them the next day because they are in stock. But if you're at the distillery, we sell those small bottles as well. They haven't released those again since I've been with the company, but we still have those releases that they did last. And they usually say 1 through 5 on them, so you can taste all the different ones that they have. What else do we have for Jefferson's? Yeah, you know, the only thing that I know is more of the Ocean. I know the older Cognac. What else? I know there was something else I wanted to say. I'm going to probably have to send you an email about it.
Perfect. No worries. Yeah, I'm looking at this sample pack of the experimental collection, and it's number 3, number 4, number 6, number 10, number 2, like it's all over the place.
It's sporadic. Exactly. It's sporadic. Then there's a few different of them. Yeah. And those aren't ones that we usually, I mean, they only sell in 200 ml bottles, so you won't see those at bars. But
You
the
guys are
thing
doing
is
the bull, and what else are you excited for from Jefferson's? The bull finished one.
well, Jefferson's has another one that they want to do, and it's another ocean tour, but it's going to not start in Savannah. It'll start, I think, more on the in New England and head towards the Mediterranean. They want more heat. Not that they didn't get a lot in Australia and Tahiti, but I guess they want a different style of heat, so they're going to try that out. Also, we have more wine collaborations coming up. I can't tell you which ones they were because I don't know. But I know that because Trey comes to the Central Coast a lot. So he's looking at Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo right now for some wineries, which are great. But I also know that he's working with our wineries like Kenwood. We also have a winery in Spain. So I know that he's probably trying out some weird stuff right now to see. But that's the thing. It's like when we went there initially, and I'll be back there next month, and I can probably get more information. But when we went initially, we saw all the ideas that he's tried before, which I liked a couple of them, and some of them were like, this is disgusting, but I like that he tried it. You know, I mean, like he did something. He's like, well, what happens? He's like, because in the history of bourbon, right? Why did they start charring barrels? Is because they were using used barrels and they're all stinky. And one of my big things is like, yeah, we never held pickles in these barrels. Well, he actually used a pickle barrel. So that gave some weird salinity to it, and it was I liked it, but I can understand that the mass market probably wouldn't like it unless you're like into the Jamesons and pickleback kind of thing. But yeah, he has.
Can we do another one of these with just all the failed experiments? Just all those weird ones. The pickle one. I'd like to get the salted herring one.
I would love to get those samples.
Yeah,
the salted herring one. Oh God, that'd be horrible.
Isn't that like salt that like Scotland used to like keep their whiskey in it, and when because the herring would get shipped in barrels.
You guys were asking about the books, right? Hold on one second. I'm gonna see if I can get the book.
Mm-hmm. So that rye was fantastic. That was obviously the crowd favorite. Pritchard Hill was number 2. Was it Twin Oak was number 3?
Yep.
Yeah, it depends on the who else has had some of these. Who's had a different Jefferson's Ocean agency? Have you had a different agency and liked one more than the other?
I had a weeded one, and so it was just very different. You know, so it's a little apples to oranges.
Yeah.
And I'm a weeded guy, but I mean the ocean stuff, the salt in it, I like them, but I was the sole vote for the chef collab, but you know, what are you gonna do?
I don't remember which voyage I had last time, but I liked this one, the 23, better than the one I've had before.
Okay.
I had the 25 and it's weeded and it's really good. I tried it. It tastes banana.
Oh, very cool. I like bananas.
I'd like to find the Sauterne one he's talking about. The latest one is the hope I'm not mispronouncing it, but the Sweeteron. I can't find the Pichon, but the Sweeteron is only the closest place I found it is Total Wine in Vegas.
I'm sure we have people going to Vegas every once in a while.
Road
Speaking of which,
Road trip.
if somebody's going to Vegas, let me know. I may need help sourcing some barrel picks from Vegas for an upcoming tasting.
I may be going next week because my cousin's going to be there and he owes me a bottle of Sam Houston 15.
Oh, nice.
I think you'll find somebody today.
You want to give me a list?
Okay, I couldn't find, I mean, they're in my library, but my library is too crazy with whiskey stuff. But the name of them are A History of Distilleries in Kentucky by Chester Zeller or Chet Zeller. History of Distilleries in Bourbon in Kentucky. So what that does is it gives you the address, the picture, what whiskeys were made out of this distillery. It gives you all the nitty gritty about it. It doesn't get into like any of the blowing smoke up your butt kind of stuff. Kentucky Bourbon Barons, that's another one. Another one that he wrote was Spiritus Frumenti. But I think the biggest one that he has is Bourbon in Kentucky. And his if you want to go to his website, it's called KentuckyDistilleries.net.
I totally spelled his name wrong.
If I want smoke blown up my
Well,
butt,
his original name is Chester.
Yeah.
What's that?
I was just saying, if I like want smoke blown up my butt, which one should I read?
You'd have to get a rabbit hole book. You didn't hear that from me. I think the one that I use the most is the history of distilleries, just because it's awesome, because you see a lot of the histories that have been closed down, like Pepper Distillery, and you see a lot of them like the Lock and Key that are coming back. But it just gives you all like so many distilleries that were in Kentucky, and the bottlings and what came out of it, the Old Crow Distillery. I mean, it's just wonderful. And then he has pictures of all the old people that worked at distilleries. I just love it. I just think it's more of like an old Scotch book, meaning that they just give you the information that you need about the distillery. It's not, like I said, it's not all bells and whistles and stories that they give like nowadays in marketing, right? It just gives you the nitty gritty about what the distillery does, what it produced, and what came out of it.
What was his website again? I'm gonna put it in the chat.
KentuckyDistilleries.net. Or actually it says bourboninkentucky.net.
Bourbon
in Kentucky.
And Kentucky?
In bourboninkentucky.net.
Got it. In Kentucky.
Yeah, that I heard you guys talking about that. You said you found a bottle in Vegas of that Chateau Pichon. How much was it?
No, it was the newer one, the sweeter rum.
Oh, the sweeter. Okay, and how much is that one?
145.
Oh, okay, that's a great price. Considering I've seen it for like 250. All right, so to let you guys know too, if you're interested in any of my other whiskeys, we do have Redbreast Pedro Jimenez about to drop any day. So look for that out in your local liquor stores, especially here in California. We are the biggest market for that stuff. So Los Angeles will be getting a lot of it. It's Redbreast PX. It is in stock with Southern right now. They just haven't released it, but it should. I mean, it's all over the United States. The only state it's not been released in is our state. So any day it should be released. I yell at them every day. What the hell's going on? When are we going to release it? We have more of the spots coming in this January. So we'll have the whole lineup of green, yellow, red, blue.
Any more spots? Any more colors coming?
Well, that's the whole historic lineup is blue, green, yellow, and red. We will probably have a new one coming out for California, but just for California.
Purple?
Probably in the next year. Purple or rainbow or something. They have something special coming. And we'll have Redbreast Small Batch again coming at the end of February. We'll have another, we have a couple of Glenlivets coming as well. Another Aberlour coming. We'll actually have some releases from Longmorn and Scapa again, which is exciting for me because those are two of my favorite distilleries that don't get too much action. Aberlour hat. Yay. I got to talk about that. They have Aberlour beanies, but they haven't made Aberlour hats just yet. Now, and let's see what else. Rabbit Hole. We will be getting a few new releases as well, which is exciting. And then Smooth Ambler. Smooth Ambler is just released their cast strength series, so it's called the Founders Reserve because it's all West Virginia whiskey. There's nothing from any other state, so this is tried and true, just their product, which is an amazing thing. So they'll be releasing their cast strength rye and their cast strength bourbons, and then you'll also see some other ones coming out after that. They're 5 years old. They come in at about 62% alcohol right now.
Dominic, I had a question for you, please.
Sure.
You were talking because you do talk very quickly and you do not pause very much. So I apologize for interrupting.
It's okay. No, and that's my thing.
So I get it. I have questions. So
sure, go ahead.
I one of my places that I source a lot of stuff that I drink on a regular basis is Pavilions, large, huge place. So they may not get the individual expressions as much as the bottle shops, correct? So as an example,
no.
The Redbreast 12.
I was like, they just brought in Redbreast though.
No, I know Redbreast 12 they have in regularly, but it's the
PX. I'm not sure. Well, see, if they sell Lustau, then they will probably get it. because Lustau was the first release in that series. So the PX is the second release in that series, which is called the Iberian series. So we're using Spanish wood influence for those series. So
I should pay closer attention.
To be honest
if I'm
with
interested.
you, I would not say that Pavilions, just because Pavilions to me is more like a Safeway or Ralph's.
Yeah,
so they will get
pay attention
Redbreast
to
12.
K&L.
They'll get Glenlivet 12. You should pay attention to Mission Liquors, K&L, Remedy,
OC bottle- the
more
OC
of
bottle shop.
the boutique guys. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. OC Bottle Shop. More and to be honest with you, any of those buyers, if you told them, hey, listen, I'm looking for this bottle, if it's in stock with Southern, they can get it free the next day. Some of
And
them
is,
won't carry stuff, but if you say, hey, can you get this for me? They can get it free.
Is Danny at Village Liquor and La Crescenta Flint Ridge on your radar?
No, well, I have 8 states, so I have a lot of accounts.
Oh,
So
of course,
I just go into where they take me.
Gotcha. I understand. Thank you.
No, not at all. But I know that the stores that we mentioned, Mission Liquor and all those great ones, they should have no problem getting it. And I mean, you guys have K&L, so K&L is always on top of it. K&L usually gets a big allotment of all those whiskeys. They don't really have any problems. And I should say, that's why I say Mission and K&L, because they're the big guys, other than Bevmo and Total Wines that usually. So when we shut down for COVID, as you guys know, most of the business went to the shops. There was no more restaurants, there was no bars. So the focus went to the shops, which is still happening. So a lot of those special releases are just going to the shops, which is pissing a lot of the bars and restaurants now that are open. So we're trying to figure that out. But we'll see, because it kind of sucks when I'm like, you didn't get Redbreast PX because Pavilions got it. It doesn't make sense, because we want people that are actually, because the first time that we taste the whiskeys that we taste are when we're at a bar or restaurant talking to our bartenders, right? So that's what I want to bring back, because I can go to a shop and they're like, I don't know, we just got it in. Now, I said the stores that I mentioned, they're all educated and they know what they're talking about. That's why I say that, because we don't want to go into a bottle shop and they're like, I don't know, it just came in $60.
No, and I have a follow-up question to that, if I could, Dominic, please, because I see a lot of
please.
where they'll do barrel picks. Bevmo will do something, Total Wine will do something, and to that, I think that I lose a connection with the person who is doing the selection, or is the producer doing the selection of the barrels, or the particular featured expression that's going to be put on the shelf at Bevmo and at Total Wine, or is there a group of people that are educated and experienced the way that we are familiar with those folks at K&L, like David OG, who's been in business 20 years and is just dives into and talks on Instagram all about different expressions?
So David, you just hit the nail on the head, for which I'm pretty much always telling people. I'm like, listen, when you're buying barrel selections from certain places, you need to know who's buying or who's tasting those barrels to pick those barrels. I'm like, because you may not like their flavor profile. They may have some crazy palate that you're like, what the fuck did you do buying this barrel? This barrel's terrible. Where I've been to some bars like that, they're like, oh, it's cask strength, it's going to be delicious. I'm like, no, it's not. That doesn't mean it's going to be delicious because it's cask strength. You guys are idiots. You realize that these people aren't releasing honey barrels to you guys. They're going to keep that shit for themselves or for their clients that are paying a lot of money. So most of the stuff that they release, because you got to think nowadays, there's not too many honey barrels that they're releasing because they want that stuff for themselves. So you have to be either, like you say, if you have a buyer that you know their style, because you've tasted a lot of the single barrel selections coming out of K&L, you know exactly what their flavor profile is going to be. You know that they have like this high rye style that they go into with the bourbons they select, or they have this really full body bourbons that they're like, you have some bourbons that are just too weak or not good. And it always comes down to the buyer or the buying team. That's why when I go to most places, thank you for coming. If you go to most places, I love it when they do have a buying or a tasting team, because it's just not one person that's making that decision, because there are a lot of shops that do that. Oh, such and such is our taster. It's his decision. I'm like, this guy smokes cigarettes like all day long, and you're going to trust his palate? It's
so
like,
do you know what happens at Bevmo and Total Wine?
Oh yeah, I do. I mean, but they also have teams. I mean, I deal with Costco. Costco is the biggest buyer in the world. They rule the world for spirits, and it pisses me off. But they're probably the most organized about it. They have a team of 5 people, and it's the funniest group because they all represent all different parts of the United States, and they look like it. We got the Texas guy in a hat. You got the LA guy that's in a suit and thinks he's cool. You got the New York guy with a big accent. You got the Midwest guy that's just, he's just there. And then you have the woman that runs them all, and she's the boss, and she's like, listen, I want all your flavor profiles to go, and we do the tasting, and they all come up, and it's the team thing. But you know, they're really consistent of what they're choosing, and it's a team effort. It's not just one person. So I appreciate that, and I'm like, that's wonderful, because you guys discuss this, you go through it. It's not just one person that's being the czar to your spirit selection, right? Which happens at a lot of places, right? They give that buying power to one person, and they're the only person that drives it. Where I find most shops have a buying team, and they get everybody involved, because we all have different palates. We're all coming from different styles. We may have some people that really like their rye, some people that really like their sweet bourbons. So I always say, if you have your shop that you like, then stick with that and ask them the right questions. I know that some of you are leaving, and I just want to say thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time. I've seen some of your suggestions. I'm sorry if I haven't touched upon them, but one of them that I did see is someone just mentioned the Heaven's Door Redbreast, which is an amazing whiskey. I was with the Heaven's Door last week from at Whiskey Fest, and they brought a bottle with them, and I was like, oh my God, you guys brought a bottle? I didn't think anyone had this. I mean, I have 2 bottles, but they're in my own collection. I'm not letting, people, so they're just letting people taste it. And I'm like, how did you do this? And they're like, well, actually, we worked on this project about 7 years ago. It was before you guys owned any bourbon. So that's how we're able to work with Redbreast. Because I was like, how did you get the Redbreast label on your bottle? And they're like, because you guys didn't own any bourbons yet. So Pernod was like, hey, yeah, go ahead. So I was like, this is a great, if you know Heaven's Door, they do a lot of collaborations. They do a lot of these kind of finishes and stuff. And I thought it is pretty. It's gorgeous. I was so impressed with it. And it brings through this nice spice note that you get from the Redbreast, but it still has that Heaven's Door bourbon. It's a really good find. And I know there are a couple shops. I was actually in a shop today that had it, and that's Whiskey Shop SF. They do have online, but there are some places that I do still. And I only find it because people don't look in the right places for it. And I'm like, oh my God, you have bottles of this. I got it at a
Bevmo in Stockton.
Exactly.
For $90.
I was. So for me, the big ones are like, I look for red spot and blue spot anywhere I go, just because you can't see them. So the other day I'm just walking to the BART station, and there's just a little liquor store. So I'm like, I'm gonna go get some water before I get on the train, get a bottle of water, and I'm looking at the back liquor selection. It's just a really basic thing. And then I see 4 bottles of red spot on the bottom shelf, and I'm like, what the fuck? How did you get, like, cause you have to be somebody that, you have to have some notoriety. So I'm like, you guys must own a lot of shops if you got 4 bottles sitting there. And I'm like, how much are you charging for these bottles? It's all $300 each. I'm like, oh yeah, they're gonna be sitting there for a while, buddy. I was like, because we're re-releasing more this next month, so you're not gonna be like, you're gonna be shit out of luck. But hey, good luck with it. Because I don't have an online presence, so I was like, it's just gonna sit here, which is terrible, because it should be about $125.
Let me ask you, do you ever do an in-person? We normally don't mention other brands, but you mentioned your whole portfolio. Do you ever do an in-person tasting that's like, here's my portfolio? Not that I'd self that here in LA, but for you and Vivian put that together. But let's just say
for restaurants and bars, I do. So like, I'll go into, say, 7 Grand. I do a lot of business with them. So I'll go in there and I'll be like, all right, here's the whole portfolio. Let's get crazy. But there's also, I represent 16 different whiskeys that have each about 5 to 7 SKUs. Some of them have 10 SKUs. So a lot of whiskeys. So if I'm dealing with Scotch, I'll be like, all right, today I'm going to come in with Aberlour, Chivas, and Royal Salute, and we'll do that. And with that, that's still about 15 bottles. So I do it. It just depends on the account. Like if it's an account that deals with French, I'll say we're only bringing Aberlour in here because Aberlour is #1 whiskey in France, and France is the #1 drinking or whiskey drinking country in the world right now. So there's just ways I look about it. But yeah, we do these tastings all the time. And the thing is like, if we could do this in person, I would love to. I'm in LA a lot because I represent both states. So hopefully the next year we can do something, and maybe we can do something in person, because that would be great. I would love to do that. It makes it so much easier. It's much more, we can sit and drink together. We can taste more stuff. You can ask more questions. And plus, it would make more sense to do this in person. I know we've all been doing this virtually for the last 1.5 years, or a year, I should say, and 2 years almost. Fuck. And so it's nice to be much more in person. We can talk, we can taste, we can see what styles we like. And if you were like, hey, listen, let's just do a Glenlivet or an Aberlour tasting. We can just do that too. But definitely anything that you guys would like to do. I know that Vadim and I will probably be talking about setting up something as soon as I get the Redbreast in. So I would like to do the Redbreast. I would like to do the spots with you guys, or even just a Middleton class, which would be Middleton, the spots, and Redbreast. We also have, yeah, and another one would be Royal Salute. Royal Salute's a little more higher end, but we can see if we can get some of those bottles for you guys. Because I know with our LA market, we do have more product as far as availability. Here in the Bay Area, it gets a little more crazy. But yeah, that is something definitely I would love to work with you guys. Even if it was like, I don't know if you guys have a whiskey bar or a bar that you work with in LA or in Southern California. But that's something we can do too.
We can make that happen for sure. Let me know next time you're in town. We'll coordinate something.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be in town in about a month, but I'll let you know before I come down.
Okay, sounds great. Well, I do want to say thank you so much to you for spending the evening with us. This has been absolutely fantastic. We loved it. And I want to say thank you to everyone for spending the evening with us as well, and joining us for this tasting. By no means am I kicking anyone out, but I'm going to hit stop on the recording and then we can just all hang out. So thank you all so much. Cheers to you. And until next time.
Thank you, Dominic.
Sláinte. Oh, absolutely.
Sláinte.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I'm going to hang out for a couple minutes and drink with you guys.
Perfect.